Good evening, everybody. This is Von Martin. I thought I would make a video today about how to raise great kids. I believe a lot of us are parents, and a lot of us would love to raise great kids. Before I start on this topic, I need to talk about the obvious. And the first obvious fact is that I'm not a great dad, and I'm not a great parent, and I make lots of mistakes, and I travel way too much. And many times I get disconnected and I make mistakes and I get upset and all kinds of stuff. I'm really not a great dad. But in spite of that, I do believe that I have great kids. I believe that there's been a tremendous amount of grace to raise my kids. And I've been raising my children in Europe. And in Europe, it's not like you're part of a close Christian community with Christian schools and Christian friends. Many times we're raising our children in a very secular society. Sometimes they don't have any friends who are Christians. Sometimes they don't have anybody in school or elsewhere that supports them in their faith. And in spite of that, I have just really seen God's hand upon our children. I've seen them growing up to be powerful women of God. I do give a tremendous amount of credit to my wife. My wife stays very close to my children, and to be honest, I believe that each of my kids cares a lot more about what their mommy thinks than about what their friends think. And so I believe that's been a tremendous blessing just because she keeps that close contact and just carries them in prayer day and night. So that's certainly been a very, very powerful impact on the children. But I'm going to talk about 5 points, 5 things that I think you need to raise great kids. And if you follow these 5 things, I believe even if you make a lot of mistakes, even if you mess up on a lot of areas, I still think you'll end up with great kids in the end. So I'm going to talk about these 5 points. If you want to write them down, I think they'll have an impact. I think they'll be helpful. They've certainly been helpful to me. That in spite of all my weaknesses, I've really tried hard to implement these 5 points with each one of my children, and I believe it's worked. The first point might seem obvious, but every child needs to be loved. I think all of us would agree on that every child needs to know that he's loved. They need to know that you care about them deeply, that when the chips are down, you're going to do whatever it takes to help your child. You're going to do whatever it takes to rescue them. You're going to do whatever it takes to build them up, that you deeply love them, and that love comes from the heart. And I know I love my children, and I know my wife loves my children, and I know that God's given us that love. The second point is every child needs to be disciplined. The Bible says, "He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves his son disciplines him promptly." So it's saying that if you love your son, you're going to discipline your son, and it says you're going to discipline him promptly. And so when my children were little, I remember when Elisa was 2 years old, and she's shouting no, and her favorite saying to me was, "Bye bye, Daddy," where she'd tell me to leave the room. I remember that we disciplined her promptly, and she was disciplined many times. She'd get a little smack on the fingers or whatever. But she was disciplined promptly. She wasn't disciplined. She wasn't given 3 warnings. She wasn't say, "Hey, if you don't do what we tell you after 3 times, we're going to smack you on the fingers." We disciplined her promptly and taught her that you listen the first time. And I really believe it's just as easy to teach a child to listen the first time as it is to listen the third time. I believe if you give your child 3 warnings, they're always going to learn, hey, I don't have to listen the first time or even the second time. You're not going to do anything until the third time. It is just as easy to teach them to listen the first time. And if they don't listen the first time, go straight to the punishment. And I don't believe that it has to be complicated. I don't believe that you need to be a psychological expert. I don't believe that you need to have real complicated forms of discipline. With my children, sometimes it was a smack on the finger, sometimes it was a little bit harder. But it was something very simple and very basic, and it wasn't complicated, and they knew if we don't listen, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen immediately. And so they learned to listen. They learned to listen the the first time. I was talking to my father once, and he told me, he works in the prison, and he told me, he said, every prisoner who I counsel has a mother who loved them. And he said, I don't bother asking them if they have a father. He said, none of the prisoners have fathers. They all knew the love of a mother, but none of them knew the discipline of a father. None of them had to listen. And of course, if you're a child growing up, you learn pretty soon that there's ways to get around mother's discipline. A father has a different authority, he has a different way of disciplining that's harder to get around. In any case, it is necessary to discipline your children. If you do not discipline your children, it's not because you love them. The Bible says, he who hates his son refuses to discipline him. If you love your son, you will discipline him promptly. You will teach him to listen. And you will do it when he's young. And if you teach them to listen when they're young, it makes things much, much easier when they're older. Now, the obvious fact is, if you discipline them without love, and the child does not know that you love him, then you can harden his heart. And then your discipline can seem like a cruel and heartless thing. But if your child knows that you love him, and he knows that the reason you're disciplining him is because you care about him and care about his future, he's going to receive that discipline, and it's going to have a good impact. First comes love, and because of that love, second comes discipline. Discipline because you love. What's that mean? It means you don't discipline because you're angry. Actually, if you're angry, you don't discipline at that moment. Wait a little bit. Wait until the anger's gone. Pray for your child. Take time and pray, and then discipline appropriately. If you don't discipline, if you refuse to discipline, somebody else will discipline your child. Okay? If there's no discipline, if there's no authority, another authority will step in. There's no such thing as a vacuum of authority. So children that don't have the authority of a father, young men, they'll end up under another authority. Maybe they join a gang, and they end up under the authority of a gang leader. Or maybe a teenage girl who doesn't have the authority of a father. Maybe she'll end up with some under the authority of some guy in a bad relationship. The point is, do not throw away your authority. You have that authority. Use it with love and with discipline. Those are the first 2 points. Third point, every child needs to be protected. Okay? There must be protection. What does that mean? With our children, we prayed about them, and whenever we'd see a plan of the enemy to damage them or destroy them or wound them, we would step in. Sometimes my wife would be praying, and she'd say, Vaughn, she says, this teacher in this school, there's something wrong, we have to do something. And we would step in and take action. What's that mean? It means if you have to take your kids out of school and homeschool them, you do it. It means if somebody's going to harm your child, that you step in between your child and that person and you take care of it. You don't make your child face the wolves. You step in and you take care of it. And that can be with friends. It can be when some drug addict wants to date your daughter. It can be when some bad influence is coming in, a friend that's going to just tear down your child. When you see someone that has manipulative power over your child and they begin to manipulate them and pull them in a bad direction, that you step in and you break that friendship. Every child needs to be protected. And that's emotional protection, spiritual protection, and even physical protection. They need to know that you'll do whatever it takes. You'll put your life on your line to protect your child. Every child needs to be protected. And that means praying for your children day and night. And as you pray, the Lord shows you what the attacks are. He shows you what plans the enemy has made to take your children. It also means when it's time to send your kids to school, that you don't just send them to any school. You don't just look for the best school and send them to that school. Many schools spiritually are an absolute mess. There's many colleges where most of the born-again Christians who attend that college, they completely lose their faith. And the reason they lose it is because their professors systematically attack their faith and try to destroy their faith. If you send your children to a school like that, if you send it to a school with professors like that, you're sending them into the lion's den, and most of them will lose their faith. And it's a terrible, terrible story. I've watched many Christian parents in tears because they saw an opportunity to send their kids to college. And in college, their faith was attacked brutally and relentlessly, and they weren't able to stand. And they ended up losing their faith. And to lose your faith is to lose your life. To lose your faith is to lose everything. To lose your faith is to lose your salvation. It's to lose your connection with God. It's to lose your connection with the one who created you. And it's just not worth it. If you're going to send your kids to a school, take time, pray, and fast. Make sure you heard God. Make sure you're sending them to the right school and that you know why you're sending them. We've been very careful where we send our kids to school. The schools they've gone to, I've been impressed with. There hasn't been any of the social engineering. There hasn't been any of the brainwashing. And my children have really learned to do their careers with excellence. And they've come out without being damaged spiritually. And I'm very thankful for that. So that's the third point. Every child needs to be loved. Every child needs to be disciplined. Every child needs to be protected. And number 4, every child needs God-given challenges. And what's a God-given challenge? Sometimes you can raise a child in a place that's too safe, where they're protected. All they have to do is follow their parents and do what they're told, and they never build their own faith. They never build their own relationship with God. They never take steps of faith. They never take risks. If you want your kids to be strong, you have to identify the God-given challenges and have them take those challenges. One example, I remember when my oldest daughter was in school, we went to a school function, and they had all the 10-year-old girls doing a dance to the song It's Raining Men and by the Spice Girls. And of course that song is a song about sexual promiscuity, and you have 10-year-old girls dancing to that and singing it, and I was angry. And I was ready to go and confront the principal and confront the teachers, and I was ready to blast them. And my wife said no. She said, "Vaughn, don't do it. God's going to do something else." And so, from my wife's words, I didn't go in and cause a big scene. But the next day, my daughter was in gym class, and she took a stand, and she told her gym teacher, she said, "I am not dancing to this song." And that was the first time I saw her take a small step for the sake of her faith, that, hey, you can mock me, you can despise me, but I'm not going to do something that I think's wrong. I'm not going to do it. And she began to take a stand. And later on in life, I saw her take many, many stands, many, many times where she stood for the truth and she stood for what she believed. And because of that, she became strong. And so we try to identify the God-given challenges. Those challenges, they can be times where they have to stand up for their faith. It can be things where they have to confront their fears. You don't want children who are weak. You want children who are strong. With our children, sometimes that meant taking up hobbies that were challenging, horseback riding. I remember my oldest daughter really wanted to take the horse on a competition of jumping, and it was something she really had to overcome her fear to do that. I saw my other daughters doing similar things, taking up challenges, real challenges, really difficult things. And as a parent, they need to do that. You need to help them with that. Don't just keep them in a safe place. They need to be protected from the attacks. But at the same time, you need to identify the challenges that you're not supposed to protect them from. Because if you do, they won't become strong. So you have to identify the challenges that are put there by God. The Bible talks of the good works that are prepared in advance for us to do. And so that might be challenging things. It might be mountain climbing. It might be difficult sports. It might be, if you're a boy, maybe it's Maybe it's MMA or wrestling. Who knows? Who knows what it may be? But whatever it is, do it with all your heart. Learn to overcome your fears and learn to take steps of faith and learn to do the things that are difficult. Don't just live in a safe place. That's number 4. Identify the God-given challenges and help them to do it. Encourage them to do it. Tell them, hey, you can do it. And let them take the risks. Don't live in too safe a place. If you live in too much safety and you start to live under fear, you become weak. And no, I don't want to have weak children. I have 3 daughters. I want them to be strong. I want them to know God and to love God. So that's number 4. The 4 points: every child needs to be loved. Every child needs to be disciplined. Every child needs to be protected. Every child needs God-given challenges. And number 5, after you have done all these things, after you've loved your child, you've disciplined your child, you've protected your child, you've helped them to face the challenges they need to face, after all that, you still need a miracle. Because after all that, they still need an encounter with God. They must personally know God. All the rest doesn't matter if they have not met God. My oldest daughter, when she was 11, she came to me, she said, "Daddy, I don't think God's real. He never speaks to me. None of my friends are Christian. I've never heard his voice. I don't think he's real." And I felt the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And so I said to her, I gave her a guitar. I had a little toy guitar. I gave her the guitar. I said, "Sweetie, go play this guitar." And I told her, I said, "God's going to come and he's going to speak to you." And she said, "Okay, Daddy." And so she took her guitar and she went and played it for 3 days. And after 3 days, my wife said, she said, "Go and talk to your daughter." She said, "Something happened." And I went and talked to her and she said, "Daddy, I was praying and singing and suddenly I felt God, his presence came and he gave me a song." And she had written a beautiful song. And it was a beautiful song. The lyrics, the melodies, everything was incredible. And the next day she had to give a speech in her school. And she wanted to give her speech about her guitar. "Hey, this is my guitar." And she wanted to sing Yankee Doodle for her class. And I asked her, I said, "Sweetie, why do you want to sing Yankee Doodle? Why don't you sing the song that you wrote? It's a beautiful song." And she said, "Well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to sing because it's a Christian song and none of them are Christians." She said, I'm afraid. I said, "Well, why don't you go pray about it?" And so she went and she prayed with her sister. I heard them upstairs praying for an hour. And she came downstairs. She said, "Daddy," she said, "I'm going to sing the song for my class." And so that was one of the challenges that she took. And the next day she gave her speech. She said, "This is my guitar that my daddy gave me. It has cowboys on it. It's a very pretty guitar." And she said, "Now I'm going to sing a song for you." And she closed her eyes and she sang the song that she had written. And when she opened her eyes, the whole class was crying. God had touched every student and touched the teacher. And they were crying. And they called the principal and he listened and God touched him. And the teacher began inviting Elisa to come in the mornings with her guitar. And Elisa would write worship songs. And the whole class would worship God together. And this continued. This went on for quite some time. And Elisa wrote many worship songs as a teenager. And she became a locally known musician. And many times when they're doing a concert in our hometown there in Belgium, if they're doing a country music concert, they would ask Elisa to come and lead worship songs. And people would feel the presence of God. They would experience the presence of God. And Elisa became someone who really knew the presence of God and could really help to bring other people into that presence. She became a real worshiper and a wonderful worship leader. And she began to testify in many ways. And she would make creative projects for her school that she'd do it at such a high quality that they would show it through the whole school. And she came to know God. She came to love God. She had this encounter with God. And then we have my second daughter, Ruby. And Ruby is popular, and everybody liked her, and she's a people person. And there for a while as a teenager, she's so interested in her friends and parties and all this kind of thing. And we were concerned about her. But then she had the encounter with God. She was in a meeting, and suddenly she began to cry, and the Lord touched her. And Ruby really began to love the Lord, and she loved the people around her. And she began to reach out to her friends. She started a Bible study with her friends. From that Bible study, she's now engaged to a young man who became a Christian. And my other daughter is very close friends with another young man from that Bible study. So I really saw God's hand on Ruby. I really saw her connect to God and her heart connect to God. I really saw the miracle happen. And finally, there's my third daughter, Julie. And Julie, as a teenager, for a while, really seemed busy with nonsense. She was always just so fascinated by the Disney television shows and the YouTube videos and all the just nonsense online and so on. And I felt the Lord telling me He's going to visit her. And one time when I came home, she said, "Daddy," she said, "I had a dream and I saw an angel and he spoke to me." And she had this encounter with God, and she's learned to hear God's voice. She's also learned to love God, and she's had this encounter. What's the point? The point is, even though my kids were raised in a Christian home, they each needed a genuine encounter with God to know that He's real and to know that He's loved them, that their heart turns to Him, that say, hey, even if my parents mess up, in spite of my parents' mistakes, because we make lots of mistakes, but I know God's real and I love Him and I'm going to follow Him. Your kids need that miracle. It's not enough just to obey their parents. It's not enough just to be good kids. They need to have that real faith that comes from meeting the Lord. And He's going to give it to them. You can pray for that. He will meet them. And when He meets them, He is the Father. He does make up for a lot of the mistakes. And He does heal the hearts where there's wounds of rejection and where our parenting wasn't what it should have been. Right now, I've been traveling way too much. I travel throughout the world. I'm gone from my family much too often. And yet I see a grace and a protection upon my children. And I see the Lord raising them up. I see His blessing on them. And to be honest, they're great kids. They're really, really great kids. And I believe that if you learn these 5 points, they're going to help you. They're going to help you a lot. To be honest, sometimes I look at families, and in my view, the father does a much better job than I do. He loves his kids more, spends more time with them, just pours out his life for them. And yet you still sometimes see things go wrong. And I really feel blessed that in spite of our weaknesses, I see God's hand on our children. And I believe that these 5 points are going to help you. Make sure you love your kids, that everything you do is out of love. Make sure they know you love them. Make sure they know you'd do anything for them. Make sure they know that when you discipline them, you're doing it because you love them. You're not doing it because you're angry at them or you despise them, but you deeply love them. They need to be loved. They need to be disciplined. They need to be protected. Don't just send them to any school. Don't just let them have any friends. Don't just let them do what they want to do. When it comes time for dating, the young men who date my daughters, they came and asked permission to date my daughters, and my daughters, they didn't sneak around. They always honored. There was a protection even in that area. So protect your children, whatever it takes. Protect them, whatever you have to do. Protect them, and pray. Say, Lord, help me see the challenges that they need to face, the ones that they can't get away from. Help me to see those, that I don't try to protect them from the challenges. And when you see that challenge, encourage them, help them to take a step, help them to take a risk, help them to do difficult things. And finally, really pray for the miracle. Say, God, they need to connect to you. They need that miracle. It has to happen, and He will meet them. Anyway, that's my advice. I hope it's helpful to somebody. God bless you.